Okay, so let's get started. Let me share the agenda for the session first. The first step that we would discuss is steps to ensure POSH compliance, where we'll briefly discuss about the 5 steps that an organization, any organization with more than 10 employees should actually adhere to so that they are complying with the POSH requirement, POSH law requirement. The law that we're talking about is the 2013 Sexual Harassment Act, Prevention, Prohibition, and Redressal 2013, right? The next step is about filing annual report, where we'll discuss briefly about what this entails, what are the things that you need to include in the annual report, who's the district officer, and deadline to file the annual report, right? So at the end, we'll also compare the differences in terms of the annual report and the director report, because the law mentions both of these points to be adhered to, right? So during this session, if you have any questions, please do feel free to add them to the chat session. We will be answering them on the call. For make sure that we are able to complete the session on time, we have placed the audience on mute. But towards the end of the session, if we have time, we will unmute everyone so that we can also have a more interactive session through the call, right? So let me just continue to the next one, which is about the minimum compliance requirement as per the POSH Act. We have 5 steps that any organization should actually perform so that they are in compliance with the POSH Act. I hear the message that you can't hear anything. Are you able to hear? Can someone confirm on chat that you're able to hear my audio? Okay, great. So there are 5 steps that an organization should perform. The first step is about POSH policy. This is where you take a stance as an organization saying we do not allow sexual harassment. It's strictly prohibited. We have zero tolerance towards it. And what are the consequences in case there is a breach? That's something that you should mention in the policy. And you should also have what are the timeframes for the redressal procedure, confidentiality, everything, right? So this is something that should be part of the POSH policy that you have. You can, of course, tweak it based on your organizational or global requirement as well. For example, if your global policy is more gender neutral, you can have it gender neutral, but handle all the POSH complaints by POSH IC, while the other complaints by grievance redressal committee and all that, right? So that's something that you can actually do with the POSH policy. Say if you have bystander intervention, because these are things that are not in the law, but you can have those customizations, but make sure the POSH policy is going to address to the wider audience in a way where it's something that they can receive and understand that there is a law, which is POSH Act 2013, which provides certain, say, features for the women employees, while there is an organizational policy that kind of provides much more than what the minimal requirement as mentioned in the law, right? Of course, without misusing the powers of the POSH Act provided to the IC, the policy should also be drafted in a way where it can help the organizations comply with the Act while providing the best experience for your employees. That's something that's the first step. So you must have the POSH policy. The second step is identifying the members for the internal committee and constituting them, right? So constituting the internal committee is the second step that an organization must perform. In this, you need to have one senior women employee as the presiding officer. The person who's presiding the internal committee can be from any department, it doesn't matter, but they must be an employee of the organization. Of course, you can't have the employer or the director on the board or someone of that nature who's implementing the policy or who's creating those policies. That person cannot be the internal committee presiding officer or a member, but all other employees in the organization can be a presiding officer. And you must identify one external member who's working for the cause of women. These two are mandatory. Apart from these two, you need to have at least 2 employees from different departments. The presiding officer has to be a women employee. External member can be male or female, it doesn't really matter. The 2 employees from different departments, they can be male or female, it doesn't matter. But overall, you need to make sure that you have at least 50% female women in the internal committee. This is very important. In terms of constitution, it must be constituted by order in writing. So when it comes to the company or a private limited company or a public company, it must be by the board resolution. If it's a partnership, then by the one of the partners. So there are different trusts, it must be the board of trustees. So based on the organization type, it must be an order in writing by the employer. So this is the second requirement. First one is POSH policy, second one is constituting the IC. The third requirement is to build awareness. When I say awareness, you need to build awareness through trainings. You can have posters, you can have e-learning, webinar, whatever method that you may follow. You need to build awareness amongst the employees about the POSH Act and your organization's policy. This is something that's very important. You should also share the contact details of the IC that you just constituted, so that if there is any concern or if there are questions, they will be able to reach out to the internal committee and get that sorted out, either as a complaint or just as a query. They can reach out, get support so that their concerns are addressed. The third step is to build awareness. You can also use posters to build awareness, because the law expects you to also do that. In conspicuous locations, you're supposed to display the policy, you're supposed to display the contact points, and you can also mention add the posters to build awareness and sensitize your employees. The fourth step the law mandates an organization to do is to build IC capacity. So the step includes training for your ICs, webinars, whatever training method that you use. Mostly it's happening through webinars or online trainings, but otherwise you can also send them to workshops. Any of these methods, they should have both the knowledge and the skill to know what should be done and to conduct the inquiry in a way which is in accordance with the law. Because IC is provided with powers on par with the civil code, which is a minimal requirement, particularly in case of summoning evidences, summoning witnesses, or recommending punishments. Those powers should be used right and used completely, right? So for the right reasons, they should be used, right? So for that, you need to build that capacity when you're identifying people who are from your organization, but who are not really equipped to handle inquiries of such nature. It's important to actually train them and make sure the skills are up to the level where they can actually go and conduct those inquiries, right? So these are the first four steps. The last step is the annual report, and this is usually done during the period of Jan 1st to Jan 31st for the previous calendar year. And that's something that we're going to discuss in detail today, the annual report by IC to the district officer. We will discuss that in detail, so I'm not going to dwell too much on that point right now. But this is done during the 1st of Jan to 31st of Jan, general timeline. Of course, there is no mention of the specific time in the POSH law, but this is a general timing where 1st of Jan to 31st of Jan, organization should file the annual report to the district officer. The steps on how to do it and all that would be covered during this training. There's also one more compliance requirement, which is the annual report, where you file that you report to your shareholders and the ROC, Registrar of Companies, as a part of your director report, where you do it for the previous financial year. So there is a slight difference here. The calendar year for the annual report to the district officer, and financial year to the shareholders or ROC. These are the 5 requirements for any organization. Whether you have a case or not, whether you have female employees or not, it doesn't really matter, because anyone who has more than 10 employees should perform these 5 steps to comply with the POSH law. You must have a policy, you must have an internal committee constituted, you need to build awareness for your employees, build capacity in your IC, file an annual report, right? So these are the 5 requirements. I know there are a few questions. Let me just try to address them as they come in. So if there is one entity and there are several officers and there are less than 10 people in those offices, and that entity is IC constituted on a central level, do they need to file a POSH annual report? So if the offices do not have more than 10 employees, then there is no requirement for you to constitute an IC at the local level. When there are more than 10 employees, automatically their cases, if there's anything that is local, if you have a policy at a national level and you have an IC at a national level, you can handle it. But if there are less than 10 employees, it would go obviously to the local committee, right? But if you have an organizational policy and you have a central committee, then you can have the whole organization handled through that. So you need to also look at the spirit of the law. It's good to have that kind of a redressal mechanism within the organization, and you can report it at the central level to the committee where your head office is located. But otherwise, there is no need for you to constitute an IC at a local level when there are less than 10 employees. So you can do it at an organizational level as well. But you should still, if you have a policy and at the headquarter level, if you have more than 10 employees, you must have an IC and you should report it to the district officer there. I hope that answered the question. If there are more questions, please put it on chat. We will definitely address them as we go. Let me move forward to the next requirement. So what I mentioned there was a minimal compliance requirement. But in case of a case, right, if you have a case in your organization, either filed by the women employee in your organization, or if you have, say, a visitor or a customer who's coming to your organization, or any other person who's a contractor, anyone, if they file a complaint with the internal committee, then these are the requirements that you need to follow, right? So you need to look at it from the last act of sexual harassment. Within 3 months, you must receive a complaint. If it's beyond 3 months, the IC in its own powers can extend it for another period of 3 months. But otherwise, the ideal scenario as per the law is to be within 3 months, the person should actually file the complaint. The IC can accept that complaint. And within 7 days, a copy of the complaint should be given to the respondent for their revert. Like they can come back with a response within 10 working days. This is very crucial because POSH law clearly narrates about principles of natural justice. So both parties should be given their chance and time to respond to respond from their side. So the complainant gets a chance to file the complaint. The respondent should get a chance to also respond, right? So that is the requirement. Within 10 days, the respondent will respond to the IC with their side of argument. And then IC can actually look at both and then ask the complainant, or if the complainant chooses to go for a conciliation, they can proceed with conciliation. If the complainant decides to go for an inquiry or doesn't want conciliation, then IC can proceed with inquiry. In whatever may be the case, the inquiry should be completed within 90 days from the time the complaint is received by the IC. This includes 7 working days for complainant to respond, the respondent to respond, 7 days to hand over the complaint to the respondent, and 10 days for the respondent to respond. 17 days inclusive, you must have 90 days. Within 90 days, IC should conduct the inquiry and complete it. And from there, within 10 days, IC should actually submit the report to the employer. The employer has 60 days to take action on the report or the recommendation that's provided by the IC, right? So that is what is required. So there is a question, or I think the previous question, the participant is still not clear. So let me just clarify. If you have less than 10 employees in your offices in various locations, you don't have to constitute an internal committee, right? So in that location, but you can have a committee at a national level and handle all those complaints at a national level and then redress that, because still it's your employee who's getting affected by this, right? Sexual harassment is affecting your employee. It's important that you take personal care in terms of taking care of that situation. When you do it at a national level, you can report it in your director report as a part of your annual director report, and you can also report it to your headquarters district officer, right? If your headquarters is in Mumbai, then you can report it to the Mumbai district officer. But it is important that you have it handled within your organization. It's not that with less than 10 employees, you should not have an IC. You need not have an IC. If you ask my personal recommendation, I would expect you to constitute an IC and handle that complaint within your organization, because you will care more about your employees than a local committee. Is that clear or? Okay, yeah. So that's the requirement in terms of minimum compliance requirement. So what I mentioned here is minimum compliance requirement in case you have a case. If there is a complaint that is filed, then you need to follow this minimum compliance requirement of handling the complaint within a period of 90 days. But otherwise, just the basic compliant where you follow those the 5 points that I mentioned earlier, that should be sufficient. But if you have a complaint, you should also follow this where you handle all the concerns within 90 days from the day the complaint was filed. Okay, so with that, I've covered all the minimum requirements in terms of compliance. I just wanted to know if you have any questions about the compliance requirement, both from the organization which doesn't have any complaints to an organization which has complaints. Both requirements I've shared. Due to the complexity of the case or unavailability of the witness or various other reasons, if the inquiry is likely to extend more than 90 days, then is there any remedy? Okay, so if you look at the law, it states that the inquiry shall be completed within 90 days. So there is no scope for the organization to extend it beyond 90 days, because the law mandates that it must be completed within 90 days. So there is no choice for that. But if you look at it in the situation of COVID and all that, there were general exceptions given where organizations, if there is a reason why you had to extend it, you can extend it and then conduct the inquiry. But it should be for a genuine reason, and that reason should be noted in your annual report or your director's report. You should just note that these many cases were delayed for various reasons, and you can mention COVID or other reasons and extend it. But make sure the reason is genuine, and the reason is also something that's reasonable completely, right? When I say reasonable, it should not be because someone is traveling from the IC and so we had to extend. It's because of some genuine reason. There is no other way you could actually do it, virtual or in person. All that should be considered, because the spirit of the law is to redress that complaint within 90 days, right? So that spirit should still be maintained. While genuineness of the case, you can actually consider it. If you go for an appeal in a court or something, if one of them, complainant or the respondent, goes for an appeal, you should be able to justify it with that reason rather than having something just for the sake of it. That's something that you need to take care. But the law expects you to complete it within 90 days. But if you have any genuine reason like COVID and all that, where the courts themselves have actually exempted the organizations from completing within 90 days. So there's again a question on the previous one, which is, so basically, even in case of having less than 10 employees, IC is constituted at the central level, we can still file the report to the district officer. Yes, at the central level where you have it created. If you have less than 10 employees, you don't need an IC there, but you can have, but with 10 employees, it's very difficult to form at every level, but you can do it at a central level and still report it to the district officer at the central level, right? If there are more questions, I can answer. If not, I will pass it on to Maya, so that she can handle the annual report part in detail, right? If you have any questions during this session, please put it on chat. We will be more than happy to answer. Towards the end, we'll open up for questions on voice as well. Thank you.
So yeah, thank you, Santosh. So as we have seen how the basic minimum requirement for POSH compliance, we will just take a look at the most important thing that we're all looking forward to right now, that is filing of the annual report. Okay, so let's just start with the basics. What is an annual report? So according to Section 21 of the POSH Act, so Section 21 of the POSH Act says the committee should submit an annual report. And according to that, the internal committee or the local committee, whichever, shall in every calendar year, each calendar year, prepare in such form and at such times as may be prescribed an annual report and submit the same to the employer and the district officer. So basically, this means the internal committee should every calendar year prepare the annual report and submit a copy of the annual report to the employer and one to the district officer. It is clearly the responsibility of the internal committee to do that. And once the district officer receives the annual report from all the companies under his or her jurisdiction, he or she would prepare a brief report on this and share it with the state government. That is what the POSH Act talks about the annual report. Now, just let's see what do you need to include in the annual report. Though the Act talks about you have to prepare an annual report, the Act doesn't really tell what to include in the annual report. That is mentioned in the rules. Prevention of sexual harassment of women at workplace, prevention, prohibition, and reprisal, rules 2013. In that, the 14th rule talks about preparation of annual report. According to that, the annual report which the complaints committee, that is either the internal committee or the local committee, shall prepare under the section 21, which we have seen already, should have these details. First one is the number of complaints of sexual harassment received in that particular calendar year, that is from January to December. Out of these complaints, the number of complaints that were redressed according to the law. Third one is the number of cases that's pending more than 90 days. As Santosh said, the POSH Act is pretty much clear about the fact that every complaint has to be redressed within 90 days. In case you haven't, in case the internal committee has failed to redress any complaint within that time period, this should also be recorded in the annual report. And you can just mention the reason for that as well. Now, as per the Act, it is very, very important for the organizations to handle or carry out awareness programs for the employees. The number of workshops or the awareness programs that's been carried out should also be mentioned in the report. This can be in the form of webinars, classroom training, e-learning. It's for the organization to choose based on their culture, based on their culture, that they can choose the mode of training, but it is necessary every year for the internal committee and the organization to carry out workshops or awareness programs for the employees. This has to be mentioned. And the nature of the action. So what were the redressal actions taken by the employer or the district officer based on the inquiry report that the internal committee has presented to the employer. So these are the information that has to be that have to be mentioned in the annual report. And now, who should you submit it to? As I already said, you have to submit it to the district officer. So it should be submitted to the district officer. Now let's see who is a district officer. According to Section 5 of the POSH Act, the appropriate government, that is the state government or the UT government, may notify a district magistrate or additional district magistrate or the collector or the deputy collector as a district officer. So one of these people will be assigned or appointed as the district officer for every district, and they will be the one who will be accepting annual report from each company or organization within that district. Now I will just quickly stop. Do we have questions? Okay, so we have this question. Is there any specific format for this? So it's not necessary that you have a template or anything, but as I mentioned, it's important that you should have all these information clearly mentioned in the report. Those are the 5 points that has to be clearly mentioned and should be addressed to the district officer. It can vary per district and per state, but it has to be addressed to the district officer, and all these 5 information have to be included. So as per the Act, there is no specific format as such, but sometimes what happens in some states, they will ask for a particular format. So that again vary from state to state and from district to district. So it's better for you to be really sure that the district officer in case they have notified something, it will be available on the internet. You can just take a look and you will be able to. We have more questions. Should the number of complaints disposed to be from the complaints reported in the year only? Yeah, that's correct. So this report that we are filing is for the particular calendar year, and hence the number of complaints disposed should be from that specific calendar year. How to identify every city about the officer, like Bengaluru, Chennai, etc. So we will cover that in more detail later in the session, but generally it will be either the district magistrate or the district collector, or who will be the district officer, or we will see that later in the session. Yeah, we have similar questions about the district officer. We will get back to that. We have another question. What if an organization with say 12 employees have no female employee? Then who will be the IC chairperson? Yeah, that's actually a very interesting question. So it's common we have seen situations like this. So what you can do is, as you know, in an internal committee, you should have somebody called an external member. So one of the internal committee members will be an independent member who is not an employee. So most of the time, you will find that the external member is a female. So in case you find it really difficult to get a presiding officer who's female, you can go for you can appoint the external member as the presiding officer. So yeah, I'll just move on. Now we'll see when to file the annual report. Again, the POSH Act is not very clear about when or what is the deadline to file the annual report. It just mentioned that the annual report must be filed every calendar year. However, it is ideal to file in the next January of the next year. For example, to file the annual report from January 2021 to December 2021, you can file the whole, collect all the information and submit it to the district officer within the end of January of 2022. That is the ideal way to do it. But sometimes, again, it varies from state to state. Some states may notify on when you should file it. So there have been several times where the Maharashtra government and the Mumbai district specifically have mentioned that it has to be submitted at this particular time period. So it's again depends on the state. Generally, it's ideal to submit it by 31st of January. Now, you will see if you have been through the POSH Act, right after the Section 21. Section 21 talks about the annual report that we have been discussing so far. Right after that, you will see Section 22, in that which is mentioned, employer to include information in annual report. So that's the second annual report that we have been seeing in the Act, and it is not the same annual report we have been speaking about. It is the board of directors report or board directors report that we all file every financial year. So apparently, according to the Act, it goes like the employer shall include sorry for that glitch. Continuing from where I stopped. Yeah, so the annual report, that's what we were talking about. The annual report that is being mentioned in the Section 22 is the director's report, board director's report. So the Act, the section says this: the employer shall include in its report the number of cases filed, if any, and their disposal under this Act in the annual report of his organization. Or if there is no such report.
No.
Yeah, continuing. So this is the director's report that the employer files every financial year. We will see how this particular report is different from the annual report that we have seen before. So Section 21 talks about the annual report. Section 22 talks about director's report. How is it different from the other one? Director's report is almost all the time filed with the registrar of companies and is shared with the shareholders. And this is filed for every financial year. And usually companies would file it around the month of September. So accordingly, the data also varies. For example, for the annual report, the information will be included from January to December of the calendar year, whereas the director's report, it will be from April to March of the financial year. So we have a quick small sample on how you can include this in the annual director's report. You can just mention, it should be just one clause or one section in your director's report for companies. You can just mention that the company has zero tolerance for sexual harassment and has a anti-sexual harassment policy in place. Internal committee has been constituted and complaints have been addressed. You can also mention the number of complaints out of the how many ever sexual harassment complaints the company has received in the particular financial year, the inquiry on the number of cases were completed and necessary actions were taken. All complaints were inquired and closed within 90 days as prescribed by the law. So that's pretty much it about the annual report. If you have any questions, we are here to answer them. So we have a question here. If companies have, if the companies that are formed in September 21, do they have to file an annual report for Jan 2022? Actually, yeah, you should. It's though it is for the whole calendar year. If you actually look at it, the company was present in that particular calendar year. So yeah, it is important for you to file, even if the company was formed in 21, September 21. We have another question that says, what is the mode of filing? It again varies from state to state and district to district. Generally, a lot of the, like I said, the district officers are generally the district magistrate or the district collector, and you would have their email addresses available on their site. And most of the time you can file it as an email. If that's not the case, it can be filed as a hard copy, as a physical letter also. It can be submitted with the district officer's office. Whether nil filing also to be done. Yes, that's correct. Even if the company has not received even a single complaint in the whole calendar year, even then it has to be mentioned in the annual report, and the annual report has to be filed. Is there any specific template for the annual report and director's report? Like I mentioned already, there is no specific template as such for the annual report, but there are a few information that must be entered. The 5 points: the number of complaints received in the year, the number of complaints redressed, the number of complaints that are pending for redressal more than 90 days, the kind of actions taken by the employer or the district officer, and the awareness programs or the training conducted by the organization for the employees. So these information have to be clearly mentioned generally. Some states, again, will give you a clear template on the information that have to be provided. Director's report, again, is the board director's report, the normal template that a company would use for director's report. It's just a clause or a section has to be added about the company's compliance to the POSH Act.
Okay, there are some more questions here. Let me try to answer some of them. If the companies have formed in September 21, I think that's answered, right? Where you have to file an annual report because you were in existence at that time. So it's good to file that annual report. What is a mode of filing is also answered. Nil filing. Okay, will you be sharing the PPT? We will be sharing the whole recording on YouTube, and we will be sharing that to all the participants who attended. So you will get that as a part of it. The company is formulating its POSH policy in Jan 22, and IC is still not formed. It's in the process. What happens then? So just that for the previous year where you're trying to file the annual report, you will not be in compliance because you didn't have a IC, and so you may not have any annual report as well to file because you wouldn't have done anything about POSH policy. It happens because in terms of implementation, it is still in early stages in terms of the evaluation process. There are organizations, even after being in an existence for some time, it's kind of not compliant. The problem is only when it is identified as not compliant, that's when it might be pretty difficult for the organization. So I would urge that you form the IC and policy soon and get compliant, because if there is any kind of investment or mergers or acquisition or any external audit kind of a scenario or anything like that, these things are also looked at as an organization's compliance requirement. And at that point, it would be questions. In case of non-compliance, there's a penalty of 50,000 for the first year. And if it's identified and if there is a ruling on the organization, it could be 50,000, or it could double for the second time and go multiples from there, right? So there are also organizations which have not been compliant, where the cases were there, and due to non-compliance, where they didn't have the IC, they were asked to pay a fine of up to 1.65 crores as well. So as I said, if last year you will remain non-compliant, but you can become compliant soon, so that it's a simple process, 5-step process that you need to follow, but it'll make sure your organization is remaining compliant. Who shall be the signatory of the report, whether it's the chairman or all the IC members or anyone. Ideally, it should be the presiding officer who will sign the annual report, because see, everyone else is to provide advice and guidance to the presiding officer. The presiding officer takes the final decisions on any committee. Forget about internal committee, in any committee, and that's how presiding officer is looked at in any committee in the legal terminology. So that way, the presiding officer can sign for all. Do we need to notify the government bodies of any addition or deletion in IC members? Very good question. There are some governments, state governments, which has they've set up an online portal. For example, Telangana government has set up a she box of its own, T-she box. So you can go there and register your internal committee. There's also something for Noida in Uttar Pradesh. So they have got something like that. Some more states are now going online in terms of coming up with those registration of internal committees and all that. It's based on the state that you are in. You should probably be able to register there, right, in those internal committees. I think we've answered most of the questions that have come about. Let me also quickly share some information in terms of what we offer from eLearnPOSH. Right. So if you are our IC subscriber, you will get, of course, there is a 3-hour online training for the IC subscriber, which is quite comprehensive. In addition to that, we also have 3 webinars that happen during the year, which will be varying. The topics would be different for each time. We get eminent speakers from the industry. We also have our own subject matter experts who talk about POSH. That's something that we conduct. It's part of the IC subscription. We also provide a template library, which would have everything from constitution of your internal committee to the annual report template that we recommend with all the details. So it makes it a lot more easier for you to actually download any of these templates. Everything from inviting someone for an interview or an inquiry, the template for contract with your external member, everything is available in the template. So that would be very handy, including the annual report template that's also there, right? And you can also have the contact details of the district officer. If you look at it here, where you will be able to access the district officer contact details from this. You just need to select the state, For example, if you choose Andhra Pradesh, then you will have the district officer details for every state. Like this, you have it for various cities and states and various states. So you will be able to pull up the details right from here, and you will be able to use that for your annual report filing, right? So this is something that you have for the annual report. And there are other features of the IC subscription that we have, which includes posters for your organization in multiple languages, the policy drafting tool, which is a bot-based tool. Within, say, 15 minutes, you'll be able to draft the policy for your organization. You'll have 3 webinars during the year, not this one, but we have it during the 3rd week of March, July, and November by speakers. And that's also part of the subscription, and the recordings are there. We don't provide external member services, but we have a directory of eminent external members who have registered on our portal. This is available for you even now if you go to our portal. So these are also a part of our IC subscription. You can also consider that. But if you are looking for district officer contact details, you must look at the respective state government's notification. It is kind of difficult to identify in some cases because even we find that some states have not announced any district officers. That is some concern around that area. But otherwise, most of the states have already announced the district officers, and you should be able to get that from the state government's Women and Child Development website or the state government's social welfare website. All right. If there are other questions, we can actually handle that. Okay. Is appointment letter for all IC members a mandate? So it's not mandated by the law. What the law expects is an order in writing which states that the internal committee is constituted in the organization in accordance with the POSH Act, and these are the members who have been appointed as internal committee members. There is no need for you to give an individual IC member appointment letter. It is not a mandate. But it is a good practice because they should also know and acknowledge that they have become the IC member. That's the reason you can have that, right? So how to purchase subscription of your portal? Soumya, you can probably write to put up a message on our portal, contact us form. You can do that. Or if you can write to us at contact@elearnposh.com, we'll be more than happy to take it up. Right. If there are other questions, we can handle that related to anything about POSH, not just about annual report. Do we also get information if the district officer has received the report on the portal, or is it only list of district officers? So what we provide is the list of district officers because that's difficult to obtain. The annual report should still be submitted by the IC of the organization to the respective district officer. In case of when you file that district officer report, the annual report, you should ideally take another copy so that they can sign and seal, so that you will have it as a part of your organizational compliance filing, right? So that's something that you'll have to maintain as IC documentation. But otherwise, there is nothing like an acknowledgement that is issued by the district officer. In case of Telangana government, when you submit that, you will get an acknowledgement. But online, it is possible. But the ideal method is to go physically submit it and get that signature. There are also some email addresses that are there. I think Neha has asked the next question. What's the best mode to deliver the report to the district officer? So ideally, it's good to have it as a physical handover. But if the district is not nearby, you can also use the email addresses. In our case, in most cases, we also have the email addresses. You can also use the email address and print it and keep it as a documentation. You can also do speed post with acknowledgement so that you have an acknowledgement. The idea is to have some kind of acknowledgement so that you can say, okay, I've submitted it and here's the data for compliance. That's what we recommend. But don't do it just like a normal post where you don't have any acknowledgement, because then you will not have any data for compliance. Anyone and everyone can say that, yeah, this is the mail that we sent. This is the post that we sent. So it's better to have it as a speed post with acknowledgement and or a physical signature on the seal from the district officer or the representative from the district officer's office. Or you can do an email as well, because most of the district officers, collectors, they have their own email addresses. In our list, you'll usually find the email addresses as well. So they will be able to do it. who's the appropriate government for compliance? Is it state or central? So the law is enacted by the central government, but every state government is also responsible for it. The Women and Child Development Department in every state government is also playing a crucial role. The law states that the organization should file it to the district officer under the district officer's responsibility. He or she is responsible for reporting it to the state government. So that is something that is there as the responsibility of the district officer. So the district officer will have to report to the state government, but it is at the state level. So it is going to roll up to the state. Right now, we haven't seen any data of the central government collating it. Maybe that's something that's in the landscape. So, okay. The one above that is if the IC attends a similar seminar, as this will be considered as capacity building effort. Yeah, you can consider it as a capacity building, because at the end of the day, it is all something that you do to build that capacity. So if you have any evidence or confirmation, the main confirmation that you collect as an organization, that can also be included as a capacity building exercise. Anything that really builds capacity, as I said, it's not just the letter. Compliance is very important, but you should also have the acknowledgement or some kind of documentation to prove, maybe even your own declaration that, yes, I attended this webinar for 1 hour. That could also be an indicator. You just need to have that documentation collected. So if there's a question tomorrow, you'll be able to use that. If there are any other questions, we'll be glad to take it up. Just for our understanding, we're just going to launch a simple poll while we answer these questions. Please take a minute to answer. And in case a firm has multiple branches in different states, here to file the annual report. Yeah, if you have multiple branches and if the branches have more than 10 employees in their own respective district, then each of those should file an annual report to the district officer, while the organization itself would actually file a report will include the entire consolidated report in the annual report by the directors, right? But the district officer report should be filed by every district if they have more than 10 employees. What records or documents need to be maintained for employee and IC capacity building, as now they are being done online? So when they are done online, when you have a webinar or something like that, you will have the attendance report for that. That can be used for your documentation. If you're doing it as an e-learning or something, usually the e-learning report, the organization which hosts the e-learning, like eLearnPOSH or someone, can also give you the e-learning report, completion report. Those can be used for your documentation, right? So there are situations where, particularly in Mumbai, they've asked for photos or pictures of posters pasted and all that as well. So it's good to have some kind of documentation. But as I said, it's not consistent across all states. Some states go ahead and build up an online portal to have everything from IC to annual report. Some states just have it as a notification and collect the report and keep it. Some states may not even announce the district officer for each state. So it is kind of inconsistent across, but we'll still have to try and comply, because it's for the organization's benefit that we kind of comply. One, for the employees, from the standpoint where your organization states that there is no tolerance for any kind of sexual harassment. That's one thing that's beneficial for the employees. For the organization, because it's also a mandatory requirement for them to comply, but irrespective of whether the state government has a policy or a process to collect it or not. Is there any precedent of imposing penalty for non-submission of annual report? So generally, it's there for non-compliance. When there is a case that goes up, then there is a possibility, but there is nothing like specifically for non-submission alone, right? So that's something, there is no precedence for that. There are cases where the penalties were imposed when the court had to handle a case which is an escalation of a sexual harassment case. and then they were found that they are not complying with the law in more than one sense, like more than one of the five critical requirements, then there have been penalties which have also been pretty severe, right? If employee POSH awareness workshops are replaced by POSH e-learning module, how do we report in annual report which asks for number of workshops conducted? So you can report it as a single program, as a e-learning program, because even though you deliver it for multiple employees, but you can add more information in the annexures or in that same report where you say that so many employees were covered, because you're covering with a single program. So it is single program that you will mention, but you can mention the number of employees covered through that program as it's an e-learning program. Right? I hope that answered. That's how we always recommend annual report, but we also give an annexure from our organization side where we give out the report completely from a certificate from eLearnPOSH. So that can be used as an annexure along with the annual report, right? So that will give the details as to the number of people covered in each of those training programs, and the completion rate, everything would be shared with the organization. Okay, thanks a lot for your poll. I'll end the poll. I just wanted to see if there are any more questions that we can answer. So we find that most of you are IC members, HR and legal and compliance. Thanks. Any other questions that you have, we can actually handle. Let it not be just about annual report, about general POSH compliance, or any questions that you have about structuring IC, you can actually ask them as well, right? Okay, we have about a few more minutes. If there are no questions, I will also open a very small poll just to take the feedback about the session. Please feel free to fill up. Whom to send annual report if no district officer of that district? So the law states that it could be the collector or the district magistrate who would be responsible for the collection of it. So ideally, if there is no district officer announced by the state government for that district, then ideally you should go to the district collector and submit it. I'm sure every district would have some kind of a collector, because the state government may, based on the size of the district and other constraints, they may announce a different person to be the district officer, but generally it will be the collector or the district magistrate. Can inquiry be conducted on virtual platform? How can we maintain? How one can maintain confidentiality in this case, right? Maya, do you want to take this up in case of confidentiality?
So we have this question, how can confidentiality be maintained when inquiries are happening online? So it's actually a very valid concern that since a lot of us are working from home or working from remotely these days, we use Zoom or Teams or similar online platforms to conduct inquiries, and you never really know who's on the other side of the platform. You don't know if, say, for the complainant or the respondent is joining the call without a camera on. We don't know who all are sitting next to them. We don't know what all information is being shared. So there are a few ways you can ensure confidentiality. One thing is to get an NDA and a confidentiality agreement signed by every single party who is part of the inquiry. When I say every single party, it includes all the internal committee members, all the witnesses, all the complainant and the respondents too. So get an NDA signed by everybody before the inquiry proceedings start. Another thing is using a video call. Using the idea of video call to be sure that the person who's sitting on the other side is not accompanied by anybody else, and they are actually in a very safe, quiet, confidential environment. It is not always practical because people may have concerns turning their video on during an online call. In that case, again, let them know why you are doing this. So maybe for a few. And video call is also sometimes important to make sure that the person sitting on the other side of the platform is exactly the person who you want it to be. For example, what if the respondent decides that I will just use the help of somebody else, just attend the call and I'll just mind my own business. That's not possible. So use the video call option as much as possible. If it's really, really difficult, please ask the people to turn it on for at least 5 minutes for the first few minutes when the inquiry is happening. Then let them know that you cannot be accompanied by anybody while the inquiry is happening. Get this acknowledged and signed by the individuals. Another thing, we can do would be to train them properly. And there's another thing called audio recording. So during the video call, the inquiry is happening, audio is usually recorded for the documentation purposes. Make sure that only one person who is one part of the internal committee members is allowed to record the audio, and nobody else will be getting an option to record audio. So in that way, you can, to an extent, you can mention or you can ensure confidentiality. But again, it is a little difficult. So assure confidentiality to the parties to the extent possible, and do not assure complete confidentiality. For the reasons that I have already mentioned, there are a lot of chances that sometimes it can leak. Then, can the inquiry be conducted on a virtual platform? Yeah, that's what I answered. In virtual mode, how written confirmation can be taken from the person who deposed? Yeah, so this is again, of course, you cannot get it signed because we don't have the person right next to you. In that way, you can use emails. Send the email, send the attachment, ask the person to acknowledge the email. Let them, an acknowledgement as an email itself is enough to be considered as a written confirmation from the person. So you send an attachment, you send the NDA, ask them to read and send a message saying, I have read the whole document and I agree to all the documents or all the clauses mentioned in the NDA. That can be considered as a confidential or a written confirmation. Can the video be recorded of all the inquiry proceedings? Again, this is something that each internal committee has to decide based on the case and based on the situations. We generally recommend using video calls, and recording can be used, but make sure that the recordings are stored clear confidentially, and it's not misused for any other purposes than documentation purposes. There's nothing wrong with it, but get a permission from the people who are part of the call.
So just to add one point on that confidentiality bit, in case of a in-person inquiry, generally you will have the audio recorded, most situations, purely to make sure that you take the notes verbatim and get the other person to sign. For that reason, we will have the audio recording. But the only problem with video recording is it can be done at multiple levels. Of course, it can be done from the system level using the tool. For example, Zoom allows kind of warning the other person that the video is getting recorded, but you can also use other screen capture tools and all that. So those are the concerns about confidentiality if you look at it with virtual platforms, but we'll have to adjust with that. So you can definitely record audio with ease where the IC member who's going to be identified as a person who's the only person who's going to be recording it. But others, you should just make sure that you announce it, that nobody should record the conversation if you're trying to maintain confidentiality. But if you are recording, you will also announce who's the only person who's going to record it so that others will not have multiple copies of it. So that's something that you can do. If it is only required, go ahead and record the video. You can have the inquiry in video mode, but try not to record it. Just try to record the audio alone for documentation purposes and for nothing else. Because it's again, sexual harassment, it's a taboo topic, and it's not something that people would want to talk about, would want to see someone explaining their concerns or complaints on a video call when it's actually shared widely. So ideally for that situation, it's better if we don't record it with video, but you can have the audio recorded simply to document, and only one person should be allowed. Anyone else who's recording it should be informed that they should not record, and so the agreement that they signed and all that can be used. The NDA agreement that they signed can be used against them. And of course, the law also permits punishments, penalties for IC members as well as others in case of breach of confidentiality. Yeah. If there are more questions, we can handle them. Thanks a lot for your feedback. We really appreciate it. Are there any more questions? Okay. That brings us to the end of the session. If you have any questions, we'll stay for another few minutes. But otherwise, thanks a lot for your participation. Looking forward to interacting with you in the next webinar. Thank you.